we all have fears. And when I was younger, I had this really strange fear. It's going to sound a little bit crazy, but I had this fear of floating up to the sky or floating up to a high ceiling. It's a legitimate phobia, and I can't even remember the name of it right now, but it must be hereditary because absolutely my own son ended up having the same fear, and his was even more radical, or at least he expressed it. I know I thought it was so silly. I kept it in when I was little, but I remember when I would lay on my back on the ground outside, and if I looked straight up to the sky, it freaked me out. I literally thought something was going to suck me up into the air. When I would do exercises during PE class at my elementary school, I'd be laying on my back on the gym floor. They'd have us do certain exercises laying down, and I looked up in that ceiling and I thought something's going to suck me up to the ceiling. It was almost like a fear of heights, but in some weird reverse way. Eventually I grew out of it and overcame it. Cameron did too, my son. But it seems almost, when you hear about a fear like that, it sounds silly. It sounds like, why would you even worry about something like that happening? It sounds irrational. The truth is, though, we often operate on fears very unbeknownst to us. In fact, one of the most recent discoveries I made is this test that people can take called an Enneagram test, Enneagram, Enneagram. And you are giving a type, a number, and it's 1 through 9. But when you look at the descriptions of all those types, every single one of those types have a core desire, but they also have a corresponding core fear that tends to be the reason they act the way they act. So we often do that without even knowing it. We operate based on fear of failure, fear of disapproval, fear of rejection, fear of all kinds of different things. And so that's why we hit upon this really big idea that if we want to experience better, if we want to experience God's best for us, we have to understand that better takes courage. We're going to have to take steps of courage. We're going to have to face fears in order to experience the best that we have. In fact, in my 31 years plus of following Christ, the one thing I've come to understand is that at some point, if you follow Christ, you're going to have to face a fear. You're going to have to overcome an obstacle of fear in your life. It's just the way it is. I think that when we follow Christ, it's easy to think, oh, it's just going to be blessings and joy and all that. And yes, that's so true. But there's going to be these moments that come where we're going to have to make a decision. We're going to have to do something that may not be as easy for us. And the story of Esther is one of those stories. It is a really cool book of the Bible in the Old Testament. And one little trivia question about the book of Esther, it not one time mentions God, the actual word God or the name of God in the entire Bible. But when we look at her story, she's a beautiful young woman, one of the Jews who are captive in Persia, and she lives with her uncle in the citadel in the fortress there where King Xerxes rules. And long story short, the king decides he's picking him a new queen because his old queen didn't do what he said. And he gathers all these different beautiful young virgins from all over the empire. One of them is Esther, and Esther was so impressive. She was beautiful. She was admirable. He loved her more than any of the other ladies, and he made her queen, unbeknownst to him that she was even a Jew. And so Esther's uncle, or cousin, I should say, Mordecai, her cousin Mordecai, was right there in the citadel in Susa as well, and was just encouraging her along the way. But there came this plot where Haman, the second in command to the king, wanted to basically commit genocide, to just get rid of all the Jews. Had this idea of a purge, basically, which there have been modern movies made about this concept of there being this free-for-all where people could kill other people. And in this case, the Persians were encouraged to kill off Jews, and there was literally money going to be exchanged and property received for people who would do such a thing. It was just an atrocious, horrific plot that Haman had gotten the king to agree to, actually. And As it turns out, Mordecai approaches Esther and says, only you can save our people. You've got to approach the king and you've got to do something. And it was a scary thing to be in their position in general, but you could literally die if you approach the king unannounced. I don't care if you were his wife or not. And so it was a big step of courage for Esther to actually approach the king and do something about this, which she ended up doing. She ended up saving her people by outing Haman and his plot and revealing to the king that you love me, you admire me. I am a Jew. I am one of the people that your second in command wants to slaughter. And so it ended up reversing things, and Haman ended up being executed by the king. And there was another edict allowing the Jews to defend themselves, and they did. And there was a great victory with God's people because of steps of courage taken by not only Esther, but even Mordecai. That Mordecai stepped in to encourage her, to put courage in her so that she could do perhaps exactly what God had called her to do in these famous words, for such a time as this. In your group, I want you to discuss these concepts. Discuss fears that you face. Discuss maybe fears that you have conquered. But also share what might be a moment for such a time as this that God has placed in front of you right now. The next step when I preached this message, the next step that I encouraged people to consider was to seize your moment. I believe that as we follow God, there are going to be moments placed right before us where we have an opportunity to take a step of courage and do what God has called us to do. It's not always going to be easy. It can be very challenging at times. But if we will draw strength and courage from God and maybe even from a Mordecai that God has placed in our life, then we can actually do something. It might be just a small little step. For Esther, she just approached the king, not knowing if he was going to punish her for that or welcome her. And it was a big step, but it was a courageous step, but it wasn't a hard thing to think about doing. And most of the time, that's what it is for us. It's a phone call. It's a sharing something about yourself, kind of making yourself vulnerable. It's just starting a conversation. It's just giving financially. And just taking that step of courage. It's starting to serve, just trying some way of volunteering at church or maybe even at school or in the community. It's just taking a courageous step, and it's not this huge like, whoa, this is going to be in the news. It's just something that God has put you there for such a time as this, to have a conversation, to make a difference, to do something that He would have you do. I don't know what your moment might be, but I encourage you to share that with your group and share the fears that you face and maybe even share victories you've experienced in your own journey. And as you share those together and you close your time together, take time to pray. Pray and ask God to give you courage, give you strength to reveal those moments that He wants you to seize. And take time to thank Him for the Mordecais that He's placed in your life who put courage in you. I hope that you will find the story of Esther to be inspiring, to think about what has God put in front of me for such a time as this. And that's something we should be thinking about, not just now, but next week, next month, as we go through our journey, as God continues to allow us to live the life He's given us. What moments will He continually place that we must seize and have courage? Because if we don't want to miss those moments, those are the moments that make all the difference, that start friendships, that result in change, that make a difference and cause dominoes to fall that God wants to fall, and He wants to use you to get them started. So enjoy discussing that together as a group. Take courage, seize your moment, and I hope that you will begin to have stories in your group of how you've experienced something better that God has placed before you.